Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming, and thanks to those who are joining online. My name's Natalia Lawrence. I'm an associate professor in psychology and the academic lead for the Grand Challenges program at the university. So before we bring Klaus up, I'm just going to say a few words about Grand Challenges for those who aren't familiar with the program. So it's a non-credit bearing module that any student at Exeter undergraduate can take part in, and it brings students together from all different disciplines to work in transdisciplinary teams with staff, and we also invite in external experts to give advice and do panels and things. And they have to consider grand challenges, and these are things like climate change, the future of food, planetary health, mental health, social inequalities, and global security. So we've had over 500 students in the last 2 years, but we've been running it for about 10 years now. And they work for a week in these transdisciplinary teams to come up with a solution to one of these challenges. And a big part of the week is helping the students learn about communication, develop their potential as advocates and good citizens, and think about solutions both locally in the local community. So we get a lot of community groups to come in and work with us, and at more global levels. And the outputs can be anything they want. They present them on a Friday at the end of the week in a showcase. They're typically things like media campaigns, websites, social media, but they can also be things like recipe books, policies, children's storybooks, board games, activities for schools, learning resources, and we've even had a few groups doing song and dance outputs. So I thought it'd be really great to invite Klaus to come and give a talk to promote Grand Challenges, because he is an Exeter graduate, has gone on to become an expert in communication related to sustainability and plant-based diets. So Klaus is a journalist, sustainability advocate, and a public speaker, speaking at COPs and to big companies like Meta. And his methods of communication include making films. So he worked on the script for Seaspiracy, for example, entrepreneurship, lots of social media, and he set up Plant-Based News in 2017, was it? Which now has over 3.6 million followers, including me. A big fan of Plant-Based News. It's great for getting information and evidence-based advice on health and environmental impacts of diet, and also thinking about animal welfare, ethical issues. And also has lots of great recipes and nutritional advice. So Klaus was a Human Biosciences student here at Exeter, and then went on to do a master's in genetics at UCL, and then started his Plant-Based News from his family greenhouse, I believe, in the early days, which has blossomed, hope you like that, into a very successful enterprise now, as I say, with over 3.6 million followers, and has raised over £1 million in investment, seed funding to keep it going. So thank you very much, Klaus, for coming back to Exeter and speaking to us today. And yeah, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I just want to check this works. I think it's frozen. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for organizing this event. I've actually got a podcast tomorrow in Exeter, so it's worked out quite well in terms of coming down to Exeter from where I'm from in London. So this is a big year for me this year, because this year marks my 10-year anniversary of being a sustainability advocate. A 10-year period which actually started at university, where I launched a YouTube page about sustainability, a page that has grown and multiplied into a multi-channel media platform with now, as you said, 3.6 million followers. A 10-year period which also involved me interviewing hundreds of experts, all trying to advocate for a fairer, more sustainable society. So just before we get into it, just to give you a little bit of background about me, my name is Klaus. I'm super passionate about the environment. I've made short form social media content, loads of short form social media content. I've made long form content. As you said, I've spoken at environmental conferences like COP28. I've contributed to Netflix documentaries like Seaspiracy. And finally, I've also urged politicians to understand why we desperately need change. And so what I want to do with you today is go through what I wish I had known 10 years ago at the start of my advocacy journey. I guess the most important lessons I picked up along the way, which are more important today than ever, because the stakes, I'm sure we can all agree, have never been higher. I'm not just talking about the environment being worse than it was 10 years ago, but society is more divided than it was when I started 10 years ago. I don't know if anybody can give any examples of how society is more divided. What comes to mind? How do you think society is more divided? Trump, politics. There's politicians coming into power who are questioning the environment. Yep. Say that again. The implications of COVID, psychologically, socially, you mean, right? Yes. More inequality. Anything else? Brexit. Yeah, agreed. More misinformation than ever. It's way more than I started, on my journey 10 years ago. Environmental conferences increasingly captured by lobbyists. Lots of ways society is divided. I think I saw on the way here just last month, a company, Unilever, just announced they were backtracking on sustainability goals. And so I think we can all agree we need to make environmentalism an issue everybody cares about again, because we're living in a very strange world now where our innate values are kind of questioned and we're not doing what I think everybody really believes in. Everybody in their hearts is somewhat of an environmentalist. So as I said, what I want to do today is just go through 5 lessons that I think are really effective to bridge the gap and reach different people about sustainability and the environment. So number 1, we've got to see beyond people's differences. In other words, find common ground. Now, I'm going to give a couple of quick examples where this has really helped me over the past 10 years, but bear in mind, it's not always gone to plan. And at the end of this speech, I might even give an example where it went spectacularly wrong. But first example where it went, well, I don't know if anyone here has seen this Heineken beer ad, but it was basically a social experiment that I, as an environmentalist, was invited to take part in. And what the social experiment did was paired people with opposing views to work together. So they put together a left-wing person with a right-wing person, trans versus anti-trans. And in my case, my stranger in the blue was a climate change denier. And so we were completely different. But by the end of the day, after doing some puzzles and finding common ground, we were having a beer together. That experience went viral with over 50 million views. It was featured in platforms like CNN, Good Morning America, USA Today. It was even featured recently in anyone know Trevor Noah here? In his recent new Spotify podcast. And this is another example. So this was a few years ago. And the guy in green, came up to me in Hyde Park in London with a dead animal, blood dripping from his lips, and chased me down after recognizing me from online. But instead of escalating, I spoke with him calmly. I built common ground. And it's kind of funny because later that week, after looking at the comments under the video he posted, because he was filming, many of his followers expressed support for the points I made. And so what this shows is the power of finding and building common ground. And here's the really key thing. It's not that this isn't obvious. Of course, we all recognize, right, that staying calm, listening to people, empathizing with their perspective and building common ground is important, right? But it can be really hard in practice to do consistently day in and day out, especially with people like this, but we really have to remember its importance, because when it comes to the environment, we're all in this together. And even if you don't care about the environment, building common ground is also important in your work, in your family, or whatever project it may be. And so this is why I mentioned this as lesson number one. But let's move it on to lesson number two, which is, when it comes to the environment, we don't always need to talk about climate. Whenever I talk about the environment, I find that climate change dominates so many discussions, so many media appearances, and so many policy proposals at the expense of other environmental issues. Now, let's talk about these other environmental issues. This diagram shows the 9 planetary boundaries. It's a bit of a complicated looking diagram, but shows that climate change represents only one of the planetary boundaries that regulate the stability and resilience of the Earth. So why do we disproportionately hear about the climate when there are so many other environmental issues? There's biosphere integrity, which refers to biodiversity. There's land system change, freshwater change, biogeochemical flows, ocean acidification, aerosols, ozone depletion, and plastic pollution. And yet we only talk about the climate. Why is this? It's not only not representing the issue. Yep.
I think because the climate sort of brings all of those together, right? So when we think about the climate, we are not just talking about temperature, we're talking about factors, things. So I guess the follow-up was to say something about the climate is exactly what sort of challenge you are.
Yep. Anybody else? Why do you think we always talk about the climate when I'm saying there's 9 planetary boundaries? Only one of them is called climate change. So why do we in my opinion, why do we disproportionately talk about it? Any other ideas? Yes, they are interconnected for sure, but I don't think it's representing the issue. And also, climate change happens to be the one topic that's the most divisive and politically loaded. The topic of climate and carbon has become unbelievably alienating. If it doesn't go in one ear and out the other because of how scientific and technical it sounds, it also just puts people off. And so what I'm trying to say is, what I think is a really effective way to appeal to a diversity of people is to talk about different issues. Let's focus on these different issues. Let's focus on clean air, clean water, biodiversity. Let's focus on these other environmental issues. In my opinion, from my experience, this is far more effective to build common ground. But you make a good point, because the thing with these environmental systems is that a lot of them are linked to climate change. So even if we don't talk about climate change, it will still help the environment. Take biosphere integrity on the left, for example. Top left. Focusing on this planetary boundary actually helps to mitigate climate change, because by strengthening biosphere integrity and by strengthening biodiversity, we don't just strengthen and help biosphere integrity, but we also pull down a huge amount of carbon, which obviously helps the climate. Research has found that restoring key ecosystems around the world can sequester up to 40 years of fossil fuel emissions. And so what I'm trying to say is, we need to think about psychology, and we need to think beyond the climate if we ironically want to help the climate. Yes.
The logical concept of overshoot brings up a taboo subject of, well, there's too many people on the planet. That something people definitely don't want to talk about or think about.
Hands up. Who thinks there's too many people on the planet? Not you. Why not?
This is linked to the industrial revolution and not to the number of people in the planet directly. There's enough food to support everyone. It's not a question of having too many mouths to feed or too many people polluting. And this is concentrated more. So it's a narrative that sort of like shifts the problem to countries that have a natality rate that is higher, industrialized one. So I think actually one of the few things that I'm against Temborose, I know about Temborose documentary, or I know I'm mispronouncing it last name, but that's the one point in which I would disagree.
Interesting. Anybody else got an opinion on that? Do you think we've got too many people on the planet? Too many rich people. And yep, what were you going to say? Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
It's consumption in a sense. You mean you have very large families in low-income countries in sub-Saharan Africa that have incredibly small footprints. But also relating to your question about climate change, I think very often, even though you have this diagram that has a variety of overshoots, I think the reason why people focus on climate change that much is because the disruption that gets caused, it completely overbears every other aspect of these in the sense of disrupting Earth systems, tipping points, disruption of the AMOC, failures of bread baskets, etc. And then also in the fact that the biosphere integrity and novel entities, it's all linked to fossil fuels in a sense. That really, it's all linked to burning the ancient dead. And we've dealt a very Faustian bargain. And those fossil fuel entities are going to be struggling for survival. We need to destroy them, that's all.
Thank you for your input. Yeah, it's really, really great to get your thoughts. When people said that to me, just firstly on the too many humans point, when people said that to me at COP27, because many people at that conference, it didn't happen at COP28, COP27, loads of people saying, well, we've got too many humans. I'm like, what is more of an impact on the environment, 8 billion humans or 80 billion farmed animals? Of course, it's deliberately provocative, but it speaks to the point about what we're consuming. When we consume animals, for example, we're consuming so much land, water, energy, time, and money. So it's really about what we're consuming. And yeah, really, really, really interesting point. It's actually the first time I've given this speech, so it's really interesting to get some perspectives. Any other thoughts on this topic? I guess the main point of me including this is to say, why are we talking about the most divisive issue when there's other ways to communicate environmental issues to people? If we talk about, conservatives, for example, are into conservation. So why don't we talk to them about rainforest destruction? Why don't we talk to them about clean water, clean air, biodiversity? In my opinion, this is far more effective than actually building common ground. Of course, we need to talk about climate action, which, to be clear, we absolutely need to do. But when we do this, in my opinion, a really good starting point is to talk about the green economic appeal. And I want to talk about a couple of issues within this point, because there is this perception, isn't there, that green action is more expensive, but this couldn't be further from the truth in many instances. Studies have shown, for example, that solar power is now cheaper than fossil fuels. In 2020, the International Energy Agency declared solar power the cheapest source of electricity in history, with onshore wind power not far behind. Both are now cheaper than building brand new fossil fuel power plants, and in many cases, developing and running brand new renewable infrastructure can even compete with the operating costs of existing fossil fuel powered plants. Why do you think China's going after renewables so much? It's not because of any kind of woke agenda, it's because of money. Decarbonizing the global economy has been found, according to the University of Oxford, to save between 14 and $26 trillion by 2050. So yes, there might be some upfront costs. Yes, there might not yet be the economies of scale in every instance, but inherently, renewables are far more cost effective compared to fossil fuels. In other words, there's a huge economic appeal to green energy. And it's the same with other industries. Take food. What are the most sustainable options? What are the most sustainable? Yep. Plant-based is the beans, legumes, whole grains and vegetables. These are the most sustainable options, right? And guess what? They're also the cheapest options. People think vegan diets are expensive, but when you go back to the natural foods, plant-based diets are, according to the University of Oxford, 30% cheaper on average compared to omnivorous meat-based diets. And this is without the massive subsidies that meat and dairy receive. Because the reality is there's not a level playing field. Meat and dairy are they get massive taxpayer money. Sustainable plant-based options, by contrast, don't. And so this leads me nicely onto the next lesson, which is the penultimate lesson. And I think it's one of the most important lessons, which is don't ever, ever, ever forget about your purpose. My purpose and my big passion is, how do I say this? It's exposing the money. Let me explain. So every minute, $23 million in global taxpayer money goes towards subsidizing fossil fuels, industrial fishing, and livestock farming. These are the three industries, according to a recent World Bank report, destroying our planet more than any other. And guess what? They're massively subsidized, as I've said, to the tune of $23 million each minute. And let that sink in for a second. $23 million each and every minute in global taxpayer money to subsidize fossil fuels, industrial fishing, and livestock farming, the most polluting industries. This is what gave me my purpose, to shine a spotlight on our rigged economic system, of the most environmentally devastating industries. But your passion can be whatever you want it to be. It doesn't have to be the same as mine. Maybe your passion comes from finding something shocking about another industry, whatever it may be, because we've got so many issues we need to solve, even if it's a relatively small or specific issue. Your purpose is the thing that keeps you grounded. It gives you clarity when the challenges feel insurmountable. It gives you resilience when the path forward becomes uncertain. For me, finding my purpose made my work in sustainability way more sustainable. And so this leads me on to the final lesson. And hopefully I've tried to demonstrate this throughout the speech, which is that it's all about communication. It's all about how we frame things as environmentalists. If we want to get more people interested in the environment, be clear. This is such a key thing when talking to people. People, not robots. Break it down. Ditch the overly scientific climate jargon and keep it simple. Also, don't make people feel attacked. I've spoken to politicians, business owners, farmers, and you name it. If they feel attacked, they will get defensive. They won't want to talk to you. This is why when I interview people, and I've done loads of interviews where I've surveyed the public and I've interviewed environmental delegates, I use the Socratic method. I ask questions. I'm curious. I don't judge. Now, I want to show you an example where this went a little bit wrong. So there might be a little bit of swearing in the next video, but I want you to watch it and then let me know what you think I could have done better. Hopefully it will work. Yes, so this was interviewing somebody in London a couple of years ago.
Big man, you sound like a know that.
If you went on your instinct and your intuition, do you think you would slaughter an animal?
I've seen it happen.
But would you do it?
Yeah.
I think there's a disconnect though, because it's like it's easy.
Disconnects because you need to know about giving birth and taking life.
What have you seen? How does it not faze you?
I've seen an old man kill a rabbit before because that's what we was going to eat that night, and he grabbed it by its ears and then broke its neck with his hand.
Did that faze you?
No, not really.
Did it put you off your food?
No, I ate it.
I don't think I could have done that. I think if you look at kids, they've got intuition to eat fruit and plant-based foods, not animal products.
I feel like you haven't felt hunger, and that's why you got that opinion. If you've been hungry, you'll eat anything.
But we're not talking about hunger. If you're hungry and somebody needs meat out of necessity, that's different. We're talking about where we don't need meat out of necessity, where we've got a choice to eat plants.
Like big muscles and I need protein.
You can get protein from plants, so we know that.
How much plant food you have to eat to get that much protein? Quite a lot. I don't want to eat cashew nuts. I want to eat steak. Like you're a big. I don't care about disconnect.
So the environmental questions I was asking him about.
You want to know the number one secret to making a steady.
Yeah. Quickly escalated into a debate around food choices and morphed into a ridiculous debate around veganism when it actually started out. But I was asking him about the environment. But I don't know if anybody's got, what do you think I could have done better there? Any thoughts? Yeah.
Still trying to get your overall agenda, right? So one of the things that you have done better is actually but what is the purpose of that video? It's actually to promote a plant-based diet. So then you are bringing ideas. There's a couple of issues there also about naturalizing what people want with their kids. So I would say that this idea that we are naturally sort of geared towards eating plants and fruits is questionable as well. So also, I mean, he responded very inappropriate. But yeah. I think you were pushing an agenda, which I agree with the plant-based diet, but if you go to any place that calls out an anthropologist, that's not going to apply.
Yeah. Okay, so a few points in there. Love it. Love the input. So yeah, started out talking about the environment, and it quickly went into a vegan debate. So what did he say? There's a bit of moralizing, and then also the naturalizing as well, something that's questionable. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes, you were assuming that you have the upper hand, like this is a natural thing, kids eat fruits naturally, and you have that choice. So there are a couple of questionable assumptions.
Love it. And what do you think? Sure.
Maybe just kind of easing into it with like a conversation of like, hi, how are you? You know, where do you like, tell me a little bit about you. And maybe if that connection had been made, because he seemed right off the bat sort of defensive, and maybe that barrier would have been broken down had you, I don't know, made it more like, not friendly because you were nice, but just bit more chill, where he feels that he's kind of coming into the terrain and saying, okay, I want to say my piece, and then sort of going from there. Because right off the bat, it seemed, I think like you had said, there was like the moral agenda, but just from the cuts we've seen.
Yeah. Thanks. I think it's possible as well that like it couldn't have gotten any better, and that like a lot of people need multiple steps on their path to see kind of any different perspective, and that maybe no matter how you approached it, he was going to react that way, but that it planted a seed in his mind that could have made it easier for another conversation to go a little bit softer, kind of thing.
I was just going to say as well that if people justify eating meat because they want to, because they like the taste, and they don't care about any of the arguments not to, it's quite hard, like, which is actually what is the most frequent and common justification. Right. Yeah, it's quite hard to sort of move on from that.
This is the first time I've delivered these slides, so this is really interesting for me to get some reactions. So I actually agree with everybody. And what I regret doing is there's a longer cut of this where it did start off really chill, and I think your points kind of mix in together, because I was really chill at the beginning, but he's just like really aggressive back. So of course, when you're editing reels, you're kind of hunting for the views a little bit, and that's why I should have shown you the longer one, but it's the reason that this one got over 1 million views, just because it goes straight in, but it's not necessarily representative of how chilled it was at the beginning. And yeah, with the moralizing, yeah, God, I wish I showed you the longer edit, but I think deep down there's a lot of truth in what you're saying in my mind. Like, I feel almost as if I'm so passionate about this subject that it can feel like it can come across in a moralizing way. Is that what you mean? If I just be a bit more chill, ask a few more questions, empower a bit more? Is that what you're saying?
So it's not going to be debate. The question is already a plant-based diet is better. So all the way, I mean, of course, anthropology would do it in a way.
Yeah.
Right? But if I wanted to establish a dialogue, I would never start to kind of like say, well, you know, there's this natural thing about kids eating food. All those things are sort of like shit, probably not true. And then he didn't listen to the point he said like about hunger. Right? That's an
Well, yeah, I wish I said to him, like, we're not in the global south and that we're in Camden in London. And I would have passionately said you're using that argument as a halo effect to justify your own consumption habits. And I actually think whatever I would have said, it probably would have ended up like that. It was kind of like Trump, Zelensky. It was bound to happen. Yeah, whatever it was, in a month or last week. That's kind of how but I think there's a lot in what you're saying. What are you saying? Sorry, I keep forgetting.
Oh, sorry. To lend to what your points were, I mean, I've seen another one where I won't name drop, another influencer had like a conversation with someone who completely kind of shifted it. And I think it does depend sometimes on who you're talking to, like as unfortunate it is to say, but you could have had somebody else with, maybe a similar experience who was more open to talking. So I think sometimes you just you've got to take a chance, unfortunately, and just try and gauge the conversation as best you can. So there's no really, you can't go into it thinking I'm going to win over this person, or, oh, they're immediately going to shun me. It's kind of like a roll of the dice, and you just got to try your best sometimes, I think. So thank you.
Actually, they can see them online, so you don't.
Sure.
I mean, I was going to relay them. So yeah, Terry online said you could have not problematized his food choice, and Jennifer said it felt as if he framed it as you telling him what to do. Hang on a minute.
Get more attacks.
I'll say what I think in a minute.
So it may have reflected his broader view of being dictated to.
What were the comments like? Because you showed us earlier where the interaction resulted in people.
Oh, it's one more.
More, yeah. So from Vipul, from that clip, it looked to me like you should have just dropped that subject. His body language seemed quite clear that he wasn't going to budge, but you kept at him.
Yeah, I mean, I completely see that perspective. It's difficult in the job that I do, right? Because I'm trying to have conversations with people, but then also when somebody's just reacting in that way where they're saying, I don't care about disconnect, you're kind of thinking of sparking that dialogue for the purpose of social media. I don't know whether that makes it a little bit less ethical, but it's something that I'm definitely, it's definitely sometimes doubt when somebody's just kicking off in an interview. So I'm thinking of what it looks like from the editor's perspective in the moment versus just being like, let's just slow down. This is chill. And maybe I should take that latter approach of just chill. One thing I was going to say, in my opinion, what I think I didn't do enough there, I don't think I empowered him. I don't think I was positive enough. And this is kind of my final tip. You have to empower people. Any kind of negative or kind of doomsday messaging is such a bad approach. What we need is aspirational messages, aspirational visions of the future, aspirational visions of how people can live their lives in a non-judgmental way. And this is what we need to be talking about because there's so much to be positive about, especially when it comes to the environmental solutions that are being developed at the moment. But you said something that I forgot what you said. You said something earlier, which I don't think I responded to. What was your last comment? Oh, thanks. Thanks.
Well, my question, the assumption here that communication can change things, right? I don't think it's a question of us not being aware. I think it's a question about power plays, interests, we're saying lobbyists. So I guess that work is important, but I don't think change can come from raising awareness.
I just add to that and just say, I think just having brought up the topic of communication, I think it is one of the toughest things currently that we, as the advocates that we are for this topic, I think that's the hardest thing to do right now in this day and age, and it comes across in everything we do. Like Amandine and I, we're part of VegSoc, right? And I think we were just having that conversation about, well, we're too scared to do so and so. We're too scared to go up to people and say so and so, right? because of this very thing. So I think, like, just to that point, it's not an easy thing to do. It might take a really long time to get better at it or to find ways to do it. But I am also seeing a lot of people in the public, you know, especially with more plant-based approaches and you know, the initiative that we're going for. Like I'm seeing a lot more of that kind of build momentum now. So it is a very important thing, and I applaud that you were able to do this. And I think with more time, you'll probably get way better at it, you know, and I think that goes for everybody.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think from personal experience, you know, I wouldn't have gone vegan or started kind of vegan advocacy like at the early stages if it wasn't for videos like this and platforms like this. And I think especially calling upon like people's humanity. When I look at that video, like I don't quite believe that when he saw the rabbit being killed that he felt nothing. I think very few people genuinely feel nothing when they see another human or another animal in pain. And I think that that's, you know, that what the evidence has shown from like trauma reports from slaughterhouse workers and things like that. So I think sometimes people care so much that they are not open to further discussion because it reveals in them a kind of what they may see as weakness or what they may see as kind of going against the status quo, when actually there's a shared humanity in us all that yeah, that like not latching, but like allowing for that to be expressed and that shared thing. That yeah, I think in many videos I've seen that you know you do. I think maybe he just wasn't receptive to that level of feeling in that moment and like that vulnerability.
Can I just ask a question? Do you find these kind of video interviews to be more effective or reach a different audience from documentaries like Seaspiracy? Because we've been doing research on people's motivations to go vegetarian or vegan, and particularly in childhood or youth. And the number of people who mentioned, well, surprisingly, The Simpsons, like Lisa Simpson's, it was an influence. But those Netflix documentaries have a huge, like the majority of people, I would say, are mentioning those, or a friend. So, you know, it does seem to be some form of communication that's motivated them.
I just want to respond to your point. I think it ties it all together. I think Seaspiracy and Cowspiracy, they were effective documentaries because they were investigative and the finger wasn't pointed at consumers. So you weren't watching it with it telling you what to consume. It wasn't telling you that you're a bad person. It goes back to your first point, which is that this interview, it probably wasn't as effective to that person because he might have felt like I was attacking him when, yeah, I mean, we can go through the transcript. I can say like I wasn't at all and I was literally just asking questions, but there's a certain element of like the way you ask questions and the way you handle a situation when it develops. Whereas something like Seaspiracy or Cowspiracy, the documentary literally just pointed the finger at NGOs and said, hey, these are the corrupt institutions and organizations. And through that, it was quite disarming and it actually helped the consumer, the viewer, be more open-minded about that different perspective on ethics and environmentalism. So this is the end of my speech. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming along. This is the first time I've gone through these slides. And so the objective of them was to get people engaged. And I think I've done that, but there's definitely a few things that I would change about the speech after hearing your feedback. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Right, to take any questions? People have questions for you? Yeah.
I just wanted to question the theory of change, right? So you're talking about individual choices, and I love that. That's an incredibly liberal approach that comes from the global north.
But the question about this individual change, which is the theory of, I see this documentary, then I feel that I'm doing something wrong, probably is not the most effective thing when we think, well, we take into account that farming practices have to do with subsidies, that there are bigger structural issues, and it doesn't matter how much we change our consumption habits, that's not going to change. It's the same like the war on drugs, right? Lots of the liberal, like Eurocentric approaches, like let's stop consumption, right? And let's make sure that no one consumes drugs in the market. Well, actually, that was not a problem. It was not a problem killing animals in small farms. and people would even do it with dignified respect, is the way we industrialize that farming, right? Is the way we produce these chains of supply and demand. So the question about our individual choice, even though it's worthwhile, I don't think it's a palliative to a wider structural issue. And probably, maybe, my approach would be, we need to tackle that more and less our individual choices in food. Exactly, but that's why is that the individual change? I mean, I can see a problem. I don't need to change my. Oh yeah, that's exactly the problem. Like, we have our theory of change is based on parliamentary democracy, which, if you think empirically, is not that we lack the knowledge, right? A parliamentary democracy by design is designed to fail when just 500 people represent 10 million, 60 million. And I go back to conflict because that's where I work. It's so easy to buy them or threaten them. So if we go through this model, we're going to keep waiting 30 years. I don't know if we have them, though. I don't know if we have 30 years to wait for this liberal model of change to happen. And that's my critique of this communication paradigm, that is based on us.
I think what maybe I'm interpreting from what you were asking, yeah, is like, okay, it's clear. I've read about 100 books about food and the environment and health and food change and dietary, the impacts of it. Why is there only one book called Metanomics, about the subsidy system, when those, as you said and I said in the speech, that's the institutional arrangement that keeps us locked into these systems? But what I'm hearing from you is like, well, who are the people that are going to do the research? Who are the politicians that are going to make those changes, unless they themselves don't change as individuals? Individuals work within the system, surely. So we need both, right? You said to me earlier that these videos don't make a difference. I get hundreds of comments on my social media. Going plant-based is the single biggest thing we can do as environmentalists for the planet. So I think we need both.
So I'm not saying they don't make a difference. What I'm saying is they're working on a paradigm of a theory of change, so to speak, in which each of us have to push. So think of this as a big boulder we are pushing. All of us are pushing different directions, and we just have 24 hours in the day, and the clock is running. And our theory of change is, let me change your consciousness, your awareness of the issue. And if you think about oil, for instance, it's not that we didn't know the consequences. We didn't have the awareness of issues. It's because we are locked in. Economic incentives, subsidies, lots of different things. So what I'm saying is, there are two problems here. Parliamentary democracies represent 500 people, 600 people represent millions, and they're easy to buy and easy to threaten. And we want them to produce change, which they might not be able to do. Secondly, we want each individual to be enlightened for then change to happen. We need to maybe change that whole idea. That is kind of my point. My point is not that it's wrong, you're not having an impact, but probably there are other alternatives. It's just that we are locked in thinking about this theory of change all the time. If not, we have protests, but the same, we always outsource the change to the politicians. And I think that's not going to happen. I think empirically, that whole theory of change is not well empirically grounded. Right? Think about the war in Iraq. Lots of people in the UK didn't want it, but still went ahead, right? And the same can happen with all the climate change issues. They're a little bit like the war in Iraq. People don't want it, but they're still happening. And that's the thing we need to tackle.
Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate your thoughts. Any other thoughts in this?
There's one online. There's a question. It feels as though the powerful, i.e. corporations, ignore environmental issues because they want to maintain their profits and can't see how shifting will make them as profitable. What combination of points do you use to convince such companies to change?
I think focus on the economic appeal. So as consumers, there's this myth that So as consumers, there's this myth that vegan food is expensive, for example, but debunking that myth is really important. And then with companies, it's really important to highlight that the kind of green economic appeal that I touched on in the speech. As I said, the International Energy Agency now has said categorically that solar power is the cheapest source of electricity in history. So yeah, there may be some upfront costs, and yes, there might not be those kind of like economies of scale in every instance, but it's inherently
more cost effective. The problem is we've got a subsidy system, an economic system that's rigged. So it's just very hard to get those economies of scale when you've got a system where, as I said, $23 million each minute goes towards subsidizing the three most impactful, most devastating, environmentally devastating industries. Any other questions? Yes.
I mean, I don't know if this is more of a comment that you could kind of elaborate on just from like speaking to business leaders. But one thing that I found, like vegans are probably one of the only groups of people in the world where if your favorite product is sold out, it's like a happy thing. Because I mean, it's happy for a bit and then you're like, oh, I really wanted that. But at least, you know, when if you go to the supermarket and, you know, it just shows that there's a consumer choice and there's people beyond you, that there's like this collectivist effort to push system change. But I guess I'm kind of wondering whether you see kind of in the work that you do that there's much of an effort of, I mean, it's perhaps a naive question because businesses are businesses, not charities, but if there is a sort of motivation beyond the profit that is genuine, or if it is purely profit motivated with the vast majority.
I think it's both. Companies want to make a profit because that's the system we live in, right? But they clearly want to do the right thing. And I think the key thing that we need more of is more people saying you can do the right thing and make profit. We don't need to shrink our economies. We don't need to live in a cave. Like it's actually just quite a simple shift. The two main industries destroying the planet, fossil fuels and industrial animal agriculture and livestock farming, both only exist because they're bailed out by massive subsidies each year. So we need to campaign against that.
I mean, there are like Lidl, I can't remember which country it's in, the Netherlands, Germany, who've actually set a target. So in the Netherlands now, 44% of the protein they said is plant-based, probably something I read on plant-based news, and they're aiming to shift that to 60%. So some of these really big, you know, our food system is really controlled by the big supermarkets, the big five. So if they actually have targets, maybe we have, you know, maybe that's a bit more of a system level change.
I agree.
I don't know how you get all the businesses to do that.
Yeah. Legislate. Oh.
When things start to collapse, the governments will need to start legislating for those kind of changes. That's when it will happen, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a true point that you're saying with solar electricity being the cheapest. That can't be refuted. The problem is the generation of that electricity, that energy is not profitable enough to excite the businesses that could make a really tantamount change in doing it. I mean, Saudi Aramco had one of the most profitable years last year, 2 years ago. They didn't invest in diversification. They didn't invest in huge solar panels. They've invested in fossil fuel extraction that's going to lock in their system for the next 20 years. I mean, it's a tragic cycle. They are the classic tragic character. So it's more of a systemic aspect with these fossil fuel actors. But obviously, this electricity is really beneficial and valuable because it's so cheap. But the problem is unless we challenge this profit motive of this greedy system, you know, the actors that will make significant change, they're just going to carry on burning the dead, as it were, fossils. Yeah.
I agree. Is there any other questions before we wrap up? Any other thoughts?
There was a comment earlier online, but I don't know. When you were asking people for.
Well, I'd argue that the obsession with climate and CO2 as a communication campaigner failing from over a decade ago. Way back in 2006, when I discovered how bad things were, it was obvious to many that climate and the abstract greenhouse gas emissions were not going to work and left everything else. I mean, yeah, I agree. it's not appealing. Like talking about global carbon budgets and greenhouse gas emissions, people care about what's close to them. How is it going to make their bills cheaper? Is the air that they breathe in their local neighborhood clean? Is their water clean? Is there rich biodiversity around them? Talking about global greenhouse gas emissions is just really off-putting. Are there any other? Maybe you always have to go from somewhere where the skeptical person is at now, and how the person will be better off if they followed environmental need. I agree. Anyway, thank you very much for coming. Oh, sorry, last question.
Is excellent. And you can talk about health benefits of being plant-based, but there's so much argument about it. It's not always, the science isn't always wonderfully clear, at least not to ordinary people, but they find it very difficult. And say if they're walking along with their dog, say, would you eat that? Or they've got their pet cat outside and they're stroking it, say, that looks nice, tasty. You get a different reaction. The ethical aspect of animal cruelty is something that is not so arguable, but again, it puts people on the defensive very quickly.
I agree.
It puts people on the defensive because there isn't an argument against it.
Thank you, mate. Appreciate it.
Like such a hard thing because people will just disengage start off with that. Right? That's why people go in with health and environment and kind of work their way up.
Yes, I agree. Thank you everybody for coming. Really, it means a lot just getting this feedback in this conversation. I'm definitely going to change this a lot and adapt some things based on what you've said. So thank you.